Hey guys, it's Austin from Jones Bros Garage, and today I'm back for another video. I finally got all three of my bikes together in one place, which is pretty cool for me to see because I've never had them together like this. I mean, obviously at the house I have, but it's different seeing them out somewhere. Anyhow, the topic of today's video is tips for short riders. I get questions about my height on a lot of my videos and people asking if they're going to fit on a certain bike. Like, I get a lot of comments on the Ducati videos with people saying, hey, I'm X height, am I going to fit on the Ducati? And then, you know, even in person, some people I know or some of my friends, people I've ran into over the years, they've said, well, how's come you don't lower your bike? Why don't you buy a shorter bike? Things of that nature. The things I'm going to talk about in today's video are really helpful for all beginner riders, but especially if you're a shorter rider, these tips are really going to help you out. When I first started riding, there were a lot of snags I ran into just because of the fact that I'm short. And if you're wondering, I'm 5'6". If you're anywhere from the range of, we'll say, 5'3" and up, you'll benefit a lot from this video. Anywhere 5'3" and down, these tips, they're going to help, but it's still going to be, you know, pretty difficult. But honestly, it's my opinion that your height doesn't matter for your bike. There's those big adventure bikes that are heavy and sit high both at the same time. And yeah, that's going to be rough for a shorter rider. Those bikes, I've sat on them and they would be difficult for me to ride, but it's not impossible. But it's just my opinion that your height doesn't really matter for riding once you're comfortable. The thing is, I can't flat foot on any of my bikes, and you do not need to flat foot. If you think you need to flat foot, you need to just scrap that out of your head, because that's not true. There's no reason why you need to be able to flat foot your bike. And if anybody says that you should be able to flat foot your bike, it's my opinion that they're wrong, because there's no reason to. Whatever bike you want to buy, if you have the experience and the confidence, it doesn't matter what height you are, you're going to be able to ride it. But it is going to be more difficult, number one, if you don't have the experience, number two, if you don't have the confidence, and number three, if it's just a ludicrous bike for your height. So we'll go ahead and get into some tips. Okay guys, we're sitting here beside my WR250R, and the first thing that I want to talk about is suspension. And my number one tip is lower your bike. Now, these tips are kind of contradictory because my second tip is don't lower your bike. But I'm going to go ahead and cover what I mean by that. Now, when I say you should lower your bike, there's plenty of ways to do this. For example, on this bike, your dampening, your rebound, and all of your suspension adjustments, you know, you could adjust your dampening and everything. You could adjust your shock. That changes the ride height of your bike. Now, you don't want to mess up your suspension and just have it, you know, bottomed out. You can lower it a little bit. And depending on the bike, you could get a decent amount of lowering out of that. For example, this bike, I think it was like 1.5 inches that you could get lowered out of the stock suspension, and it still was set correctly for my weight. So there you go. You already got 1.5 inches shaved down. And the second thing that you could look into is things like seats. Like this seat right here, I forget the exact number, but it's a spiral step down seat. And that dropped it, I think, 1 inch or 1/2 inch, something around there. So those are two ways that I got my bike lower without actually lowering the suspension. And now that brings me to tip number 2. Don't lower your suspension. And as you can see, this is a YAMA link, this is a lowering link, and my suspension has been lowered on this bike. But what you have to understand is what this does. This changes the geometry of your suspension, and it changes the way your suspension handles. So this lowering link, it brought the shock down, and it pushed the swing arm back. So the rear tire is actually a tiny bit further back than it was before. Like, without this lowering link, this swing arm is more of an angle this way. And now with this lowering link, it's pushed it up. So it's pushed this tire back, therefore lowering the bike. So that has changed the geometry of this suspension. And on a bike like this, that's the thing, you know, this is kind of a case per case type of thing. 99% of the time, I'm going to recommend that you do not lower your bike with suspension lowering unless it's absolutely necessary, or if it's a bike that it actually makes sense to do it on. It made sense for me to lower this WR because I was riding it off-road and it was my first true dirt bike, and I was having trouble getting on and off of it. If I would mess up on a hill climb, then it was really a struggle to get back on. And the fact that it altered the suspension geometry didn't really matter because, you know, it's not like it's a motocross bike. If I really wanted optimal suspension, I would have just bought a YZ. So this is one of those cases where I'd say, you know, this is okay. But for this to work properly, you also have to drop your forks in your triple tree. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. But you could just further see now that these shocks aren't in their original placement in the triple tree, and it's not how this bike was intended to be. They spent all of the money that they spent engineering this suspension, and when you lower your bike, you're just throwing all of that out the window, which is why I don't recommend actually lowering your bike. I recommend looking for other ways to lower it, whether it be lower tires, a lower seat. Adjusting your suspension is a big thing too. Okay guys, and the third tip, you don't have to flat foot your bike. A lot of people think that they have to flat foot their bike, and I understand when you're first starting to ride, it is very, very nice to be able to flat foot your bike. And not being able to flat foot your bike can be very scary. But if you're somebody that's, say you're on a Ninja 400 right now, or you know, you're on a Harley Davidson Sportster, whatever. Say you're on a lower bike right now and you're thinking, hey, can I ride a Ducati V2? Can I ride a Ninja 636? Can I ride a WR250R? If you already know how to ride, the answer is yes, you can. If you could ride a Ninja 400, you could ride a Ninja 636. All you have to be able to do is to tippy toe one side, because ideally the most efficient way to stop is with your right foot on the brake and your left foot down. So you don't need to be able to flat foot one foot, let alone both feet, in order for your bike to fit you. And now if you're used to always flat footing a bike, then this is probably going to take some practice, but it comes easily. After, you know, a couple weeks, it'll start to feel natural, and you just have to remember to watch where you stop, because you don't want to be stepping into a pothole on a bike that you're tippy toeing. You know, you got to watch. It's not like on a bike that you flat foot, you could be kind of a little bit more careless about where you stop, but on a bike that you're tiptoeing, it actually matters, and it matters the angle of the hill you're on, everything. So as you guys could see, even on this big 900 some pound bike, I'm still holding it up with one foot and back brake. And not only am I holding it up with one foot, I'm still on my tippy toes. This is something that just comes with practice, but don't feel like a bike is too big for you or feel discouraged if you sit on it and you can't flat foot, because that's not necessarily an issue. So that brings me to my next thing. Rear brake control is everything. Rear brake control is key. I could balance my bike, any bike, you know, whether it be this Bagger, which is over 900 pounds, or my WR, which is super light. I could ride, you know, less than 1 mile per hour, less than idle, and I could just balance the bike with the rear brake and just keep it upright for a pretty good time. Even sitting still, I could keep the bike up for a while just with my body weight. And if you're a short rider, this is something that's really going to come in handy. And you know, this is a good tip for anybody, any beginner especially. You don't want to be putting your foot down. Like, you want to be able to do a U-turn. You won't be able to do tight turns and maneuvers without putting your feet down. But if you're a short person, it's especially going to be hard, because sometimes when you feel, you know, a lack of confidence, or you feel like you need to put your foot down, if you're on a bike that's too tall for you, then that's not an option. So you're really going to need to learn to feather that rear brake. I'm telling you, somehow with physics, I don't know the exact physics of it, but that rear brake keeps that bike upright. Okay guys, so I was talking about using the rear brake and making sure you watch where you stop, because you don't want to stop where there's a pothole, you're tiptoeing your bike and you step into the pothole, you're probably going to go down with the bike. And this next tip is kind of along those same lines. If you are a shorter rider with a taller bike, you need to watch where you park the bike, especially when you're talking about, you know, a big heavy bagger or cruiser like mine, or even the dirt bike, because dirt bikes tend to be kind of top heavy. The sport bike is generally, it's okay to park on any angle, but the bagger, it's going to be rough if you park on a bad angle, and the dirt bike could just fall over if you park on a bad angle. For example, now when I have the bike parked this way, you know, the kickstand on the up angle, I could still flat foot because this bike is generally somewhat low when it's on its kickstand. Now you're pushing up onto a side where your foot's going to be lower. So you're basically, if you have a bike that's really tall for your height, you're not even going to be able to put that right foot down at all, which is going to make it pretty difficult. The next thing that I want to talk about is moving your bike or reversing your bike. If you're a taller rider, then you probably don't know this struggle. Let me show you what it looks like. Okay, let me just go ahead and back on out of this parking spot. See, if you have a bike that's too tall for you and you're a short rider and you can't flat foot, you are going to have a lot of trouble trying to walk your bike backwards. So you might, when you're out and about, just cruising through the parking lot, your local Walmart, maybe you're a beginner rider and you see some more experienced riders walking their bike backwards. Well, let me tell you something. You do not have to walk your bike backwards like that. If you are a short rider, it is just going to make your life miserable. It seems so simple, but so many times I see riders who are short try to waddle their bikes in reverse, when all you have to do is grab a hold of those bars and walk it back. The next thing I want to talk about sounds kind of silly, but I feel like a lot of people don't think about this, and it's your shoes. Now, I've never been the biggest advocate of safety, I guess you could say. I mean, I wear my helmet, but currently wearing my my Air Force Ones, not exactly primed for riding. But I'm going to show you an example of what I mean when I say your shoes can affect if you could touch the ground or not if you're a shorter rider. So you guys could see in my my Nikes, I got about probably an inch or so of heel on these, and that's going to make me about 1 inch taller. So that can make a little difference with your height when it comes to trying to get your foot down on your bike. These are a pair of my riding shoes, and as you can see, these have almost no heel and pretty much very thin tread down here on the bottoms. So these aren't going to add any height. So if you're a short rider, it could be a good idea to actually look at the riding boots you're buying and see if you can maybe get a little bit extra height out of them. For example, you know, this might be a little extreme, but these boots make me significantly taller. Motocross and sport bike racing boots also generally are going to make you a lot taller. So if you're riding a sport bike or a dirt bike and you want optimal safety and you need a little height, these are going to be a good choice for you. You also have to consider the fact that you could get some extra height on the heel like this out of boots that are less extreme or less dedicated for racing. So I just wanted to show you an example that these definitely, I feel taller in these. I could definitely feel the difference. So guys, the biggest thing is just confidence. If you're nervous to get a bike because you think it's going to be too tall for you, then maybe you should start out on a lower bike or get some more experience and then move on to the bigger bike. But if you've been riding for a while and you have a bike that you could flat foot and you're worried about getting a bike that you can't flat foot, or maybe you could just tippy toe one side, that's okay. That's not a problem, and that's completely doable. You know, that's what I do with a lot of bikes. So when I get comments such as, oh, I'm 5'4", will I fit on the Panigale V2? Oh, I'm 5'3", will I fit on the Panigale V2? Oh, I'm 5'5", can I ride the WR250R? My answer is generally going to be yes. If you have the skill and the knowledge and you follow these tips, you can ride any motorcycle regardless of how high it is. And it might be more difficult and it might take some getting used to, but it's completely possible. Thank you guys for checking out my video. If you found it helpful or you enjoyed it, then go ahead and leave a like. If you have any questions or maybe an opinion, then go ahead and leave a comment. I answer all my comments, so I'll get around to answering you. And if you want to see more content like this, then go ahead and give that subscribe button a little finger action. My current goal is 1,000, and I'll be really happy if I can hit that. So thank you guys.